Here's a really quick review of the content we covered in class today. I'm going to focus on the procedure rather than explaining all the essentials. So I'm creating a new project. I'm going to choose File, New Project. I'm going to set the location to the desktop. I'm going to choose Desktop as the location. I'm going to call this Gravity or Gravity Lab or whatever the case. I'll hit Save. This is located on the desktop. I want the character controller, that's essential. Everything else is optional. I'm going to use physics materials and skyboxes. I'll use those later to enhance the aesthetic of the project. I'll hit Create Project. It'll take a moment for Unity to build that process out. When it's done, I'll have, on my desktop, I'll have a project called Gravity. I'm going to set up the basic project. So the first thing that we did in class was we created a cube. So I'm going to go to Game Object, Create Cube. I'm going to rename this cube. I'm going to rename it Ground. And I'm going to resize it to an appropriate size. I'm going to scale it up 20 along the X and 20 along the Z. I'm then going to change the orientation. I'm going to hold down Option, click and drag to orbit so that I'm looking in the direction of the blue axis. There we go. I'll make some decisions about the camera a little bit later, but the next thing that I want to do is I want to create another game object. This time around I'm going to create a sphere. I'm going to lift that sphere up in space, or I'm going to increase its Y position. With the sphere still selected, I'm going to go to Components, Physics, Rigid Body. Now when I hit the play button, I'll snap over to my camera and I can see my sphere falling to the ground. I'll toggle the play button again. I'll create game object and I'll introduce a directional light into the equation. With the directional light selected, I'll go to shadow type and I'll choose hard shadow. That'll give me a little bit better sense of the dimension of the scene. At this point, I can continue to play with different variables. In class, we also created a cube. This cube I'll reposition and I'll rescale it. So I'll make it about 3 parts tall along the Y. I'm going to take it down on the X-axis to about 0.5 or maybe even 0.2. And again, I'm looking to create sort of a domino style piece of geometry. So that might be a little tall. Maybe I'll take this down to 2.5. It's still a little tall, maybe 2 will work best, but I'm just going to move that a little bit closer to the ground, being sure not to intersect with the ground plane. I'll leave it standing up just a little bit. We'll be more precise later on. With that new cube selected, I'm going to go to Components, Physics, Rigid Body. And at this point now that cube is governed by the physics engine and so is the sphere. Next thing that I want to do is I want to set up Playmaker to work inside this environment. I'm going to go to Windows, Asset Store. From the Asset Store, once I'm logged in, maybe. I'll pause this until it loads. Okay, so once you're logged in, you can go to the download screen. And from there, I'm looking for Playmaker. I've already downloaded. I'm going to hit the import button. It'll take a moment to decompress that package and import. Hit the import button to get it inside your scene. I'll let the import process take effect. And then I'm quickly going to configure my windows so that I can work pretty comfortably inside Playmaker. So I'll close the Asset Store. You'll see that I do not yet have the Playmaker window at the top of the screen, but when I click on the menu, the Playmaker window pops up. At this point, I'm going to choose Playmaker Editor. I'm going to take the Playmaker tab and I'm going to nest that. I like having it to the right of my project window. I'll resize it just a bit. Next thing I'll do is I'll go to Playmaker Editor Windows. And I'll choose Action Browser. Those are the 2 primary components that we want to look at, and I'm going to nest that somewhere next to my inspector. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to use Playmaker to take control over this sphere, and I'm going to do it very quickly. I'm going to select the sphere, or select it in the hierarchy. Down in the Playmaker Editor window, I'm going to right-click and add FSM. I'm going to make sure that State 1 is selected. With State 1 selected, what I want to do is I want to go find the input category in the Actions browser, and I want to choose to get axis vector. I'll double click once it's selected to load that action on State 1. The next thing that I need to do is I need to create a store vector. I need to create a vector3 variable. I can do that by going to the Variables tab. Down where it says New Variable, I'm simply going to call this, for this demo, I'll call it ball. The variable type, I will choose vector3. I'll add that so that I have access to that variable. I can see it here. It's ball, vector3. I'm going to go back to my state tab. And now in the store vector, I'm going to select that ball variable from the list. If you do not have that ball variable in the list, it's either you didn't complete creating the variable or you chose the wrong variable type. Now that I have ball selected, I always recommend selecting the debug option down at the bottom. That shows you the user input or the variable input. In this case, it'll be user input. So I have a get access vector. That translates the AWSD keys or the arrow keys by the user. The next thing that I want to do is I want to look for the category of action that says physics. So these are alphabetical order. So I'm going to look under P. There's physics. And I want to double click on add force. I want to add force based on this vector variable. So I'm going to go find the vector field. And in the vector drop-down menu, I'll choose that variable of ball. Now at this point, this should start to work. But if I'll have very little force that's being applied to my sphere. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the get access vector action that we've added. And I'm going to bump up the multiplier to about 5. On the add force action, I did forget to choose every frame, so I'll need to catch that now and check the checkbox that says every frame. At that point, as long as we have a get access vector action and we're storing this store vector in a vector that we created, we then add force and use that same vector as the amount of force that we're applying to our sphere. At this point, if I hit the play button, I should be able to use the AWSD keys to control the sphere, and you can see it's working just the way that I expected it to. The next thing that I'll need to do in this situation is I'll recompose the camera and I'll continue to influence my environment. But that's the nuts and bolts of getting Playmaker and this physics setup up and running very quickly. If you have any questions, you can email me directly.